Um, this book describes how various businesses and organizations exploit the human emotion of the shame to generate the profit and expand their power. What were your concerns and background that led you to write this book?
I'm a technologist and I'm an expert on algorithms. And the thing that I realized about algorithms very quickly, and this is not news to people, is that they scale massively. So a decision made by a particular person who is building an algorithm could affect hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So these decisions are really important. Technology is scaling, and the sort of cultural effects of these massively scaled systems are what interest me. And I felt like shame was playing into that technological system a lot. So I started um, focusing on on shame. When is shame appropriate? What kind of shame is appropriate? And trying to understand how these systems that were built by technologists were producing shame.
So the book discusses how diet-related business monetize by exploiting people's feeling of the shame. Could you explain this point?
And part of it had to do with my own personal experience looking into, um, you know, weight loss surgeries and other kinds of sort of medical approaches. This is before GLP-1s, by the way, which is an interesting change, although not a completely different situation. But as nobody is surprised to hear, like very quickly, I was profiled by the internet, if you will, by my environment, my online. I was profiled as somebody who had struggled with my weight, and I was bombarded with advertisements that were clearly aiming to make me ashamed of myself and to make me desperate to escape this feeling of shame, and to pay someone else to solve a problem for me, even though the things that they were offering me for money were not going to solve my problem. And that was fascinating to me, just to think about how making me feel bad and offering me something to buy were sort of peas in a pod. They were just somehow very naturally put together. And I was like, it made me it made me wonder, like, for whom does this work? Like, how does this, how come this is such a successful business model that you're offering me something to buy that's not going to solve my problem, but it's still gonna work. Like, people are still gonna pay for that. Um, and so I was fascinated by it because it's in some sense an unnatural thing to do. It's an unnatural thing to buy a product that you know won't work, but it's still a business model. So, like, what's the explanation? And the explanation is that shame makes us do things that don't make sense.
Did you have this like a point of the issue for a long time, or suddenly one day you realize that? When did you get an
Mm.
idea?
Well, that's a great question. Like, I guess in terms of my personal story, I was always overweight, like from a child. So I certainly have was not a stranger to the idea that someone was going to try to sell me a new food system, a new diet pill, a new approach to eating, blah, blah, blah. Like, there was that I had certainly experienced that every now and then. But I guess I would say that the fact that it was online and it was constant. So even when I was no longer searching for bariatric surgery or other things, I was still being absolutely constantly bombarded with these advertisements. And so the fact that it was just unending, relentless um, shaming of me made me just confront it on a daily basis. And then it made me think through it philosophically, if you will. And likewise, other things that where there was a lot of profit model built on it and shame were combinations of things where you should feel bad and then you should try to do something about it. And you only have a certain limited amount of control. So when it fails, You should feel bad about it and pay more to try to fix it. So it was this sort of never-ending merry-go-round of failure and shame that they could sort of keep the merry-go-round spinning and make sure that you feel like the fact that this failed wasn't our fault because we have a bad product, but it's your fault for not doing it right. I think likewise in the situation that you just described in Japan with the competitive testing, the idea being that if you studied harder, you'd get better at these tests. And of course, that to some extent is true, but there's only a limited way that any particular person can get better. So it's the exact setup that I was looking for at the time, which is like you should feel bad about the lack of control you have. And in fact, you should pay us money so that you can feel like you have more control, even though it's not actually going to change that much. There's a certain amount you can do, and then after that, you really don't have control. But if you're made to feel bad enough about it, if you're ashamed of it, then maybe we can get some more money out of you.
The beauty industry also profits from the sense of the shame. So could you explain the relationship between shame and the beauty industry?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty industry is, of course, the original, I would say the original OG shame industry, for-profit shame industry. It's built on the basic issue that people get older and they get wrinkles and they're less beautiful as they get older. I mean, actually, that's just an assumption. Of course, you can change that assumption and we can imagine that older people are more beautiful. So I'm not saying I agree to it, but this is the kind of a common cultural assumption is that young people are beautiful and old people are less beautiful. And so it's the most sort of the oldest shame industry in the book is to say, you should feel ashamed of your wrinkles on your skin, and you should pay us for a product to get rid of your wrinkles. And we know that those products don't work, but they do work in the sense that the industry makes money, so they manage to sell a lot of products. So in that sense, the shame industry is working, even if the wrinkles don't go away.
Book dedicates the pages to how social media has become a dangerous tool for the intensely fueling shame. Could you explain the relationship between social media and shame?
One of the things that we've already described is sort of the direct historical sh for-profit shame industries like the beauty industry, or the diet industry. And both of those examples are quite direct. Like you should be ashamed of yourself, then you should buy our product. And for that matter, what you were just describing, like the test prep industry in Japan is probably the same. Or maybe your child should be ashamed. Your child, you should pay for this for your child. So it's like be ashamed of your child type thing. But it's a direct shame. Like you should feel bad. Here's a solution with that costs money. I feel like the social media has done something really clever to us, where it doesn't directly shame us. Instead, it creates a platform that we go to and we shame each other. So we don't like directly allow them to make money by feeling ashamed. Like they're not shaming us. Like Facebook isn't shaming me, Instagram isn't shaming me, TikTok isn't shaming me directly, but the other people on those platforms are shaming me and I'm shaming them. And it's like extremely engaging to feel like, oh, I get to shame this person for saying the wrong thing or for doing the wrong thing. And it's also extremely exciting and in a bad way to be ashamed, to be the target of shame. So in either case, you're super engaged. You spend a lot more time on the platform, and by spending that much time, that's how you make money for the platform. So basically, the platform has done this really clever thing of not having to engage in direct shaming of its customers, but rather just allowing them to sort of exist on this shame-based platform where they design it to be maximally shame-based. So they design it to make it easy to make an example of somebody. Oh, this person should be ashamed of themselves. They sort of design it explicitly so that that's easy to do. and get people super engaged in this process of shaming each other, and then make a lot of money because they're spending so much time doing that. And it's obviously at a massive scale. I think it's maybe has gone down a little bit um, since I wrote the book, but during COVID in particular, people spent just hours and hours on social media because they were stuck at home. And when you're on the platform that long, that's what you end up doing. You end up being part of this, what I call the shame trains of social media.
Even like before the TV commercial or the magazine or the newspaper, they always use same technique. But do you think that the social media kind of increase the situation, make the situation worse?
Social media definitely has made things worse in terms of the shame industry complex. Magazines, of course, and media um, have always had to be written for a pretty general audience, not completely general. Certainly, some magazines were written for housewives, other magazines were written for men who like to work out, or something like that, so categories of people. But the thing about social media is that it's not categories, it's not tailored to a category of people, it's tailored to you specifically because it has all the data of all your interactions on social media. So it's not just saying people like you get interested or engaged by these kinds of topics. I mean, it certainly does that as well, but it says you know this other person. This other person is has done something that seems to be shameful. What do you think? And so it's very personal. It's very, very highly tailored to engage you specifically in the kinds of interest and the kinds of people that you already know, and to sort of ask your opinion, ask you to sort of weigh in on whether something is shameful or not. So in that sense, it's just so much more direct and personal than magazines and media could have been in the past.
This book covers various of the themes, including diet, drug addiction rehabilitation, educational support for the poor. It almost all of those like cases, scientific data or
Yeah.
statistic data, which is used as evidence, but it is used inaccurately and as a tool to lead people to misinterpret things. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this use of data?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things about successfully shaming people is that it helps to seem authoritative. We've seen this actually with the large language models like ChatGPT and the other chatbots, is that one of the reasons that they seem trustworthy is that they sound authoritative, they sound informed, they sound like experts. And so shame a system is also set up that way, that they first establish that they're the ones that have the data behind them. They have the science to back them up. And this is why you should feel bad. Whether it's pseudoscientific descriptions of how certain kinds of drugs will help you avoid senility, like with the Prevagen example, there's often or almost always some kind of pseudoscientific backing of the descriptions of what's going on in the background. And this is meant to make you feel um, like isolated and more shamed, like you have even more reason that you should be doing something about this terrible thing about you. And of course, when I say all this, I'm not trying to discount the possibility that there is real science going on sometimes. Um, but that usually what I'm really trying to describe is that the pseudoscience is being used to make a persuasive case that you should be ashamed of yourself and you should pay for a product. So this is not, it's really marketing in the form of science. I also wrote a previous book, Weapons of Math Destruction, and as of course, The Shame Machine. Both of these are attempts to try to like be more honest and to try to cut through the marketing hype of algorithms in general and how algorithms are used against people and how they might harm people. I think that there's a huge amount, and it's true for AI now too. There's a huge amount of hype around these technologies, and part of their marketing absolutely centers on the fact that a normal person doesn't really understand how they work. And so that's used against people a lot, I would say. Um, in in the at the highest level, basically, people are told if you don't have a PhD in computer science or mathematics or statistics, then you really have no place to complain about this system. And my work is, I think, directly against that notion. My goal in writing my books is to say, actually, you have every right to complain about a system and how it's affecting you personally. You don't need a mathematical degree. You don't need to understand the sort of details of the technology to say, this technology is bad for me.
The book states that when faced with the emotion of the shame, people lose their composure, can easily make the false judgment. How does the emotion of the shame distort human judgment?
Yeah, that's actually one of the most critical reasons that the shame industry is work. That when people are initially the moment of initial shame, they absolutely are desperate to feel lovable, because shame at the heart of it is a feeling of unlovability, that you don't deserve respect, love, you don't deserve to be part of society, that you maybe are deserve to be shunned and cast away from society altogether. So at that moment, it's a very terrible moment. Like, after all, you could die if you are left alone and isolated when you don't have society to take care of you. So you're basically desperate to do whatever it takes to get back in the good graces of the norm group that you've just, you know, that you've just been rejected from. So that's the right moment to say, hey, buy this, pay for this service or buy this product, and you will be okay. So that's really why the whole shame industrial complex succeeds, is that we don't think very clearly. We're desperate at those moments of shame.
How should our society confront the shame machine? Do you think that the problem is that people feel too much shame, or do you think more public measure, such as a legal regulation, are need to encourage restraint from the those who profit from the exploiting feeling of the shame?
Yeah, to be clear, I want to like make sure that it's what I'm not saying is that shame is always bad. I go to some trouble in the book to try to understand, when is shame appropriate, um, and when is shame inappropriate. And I would say shame is inappropriate if the person that you're shaming actually doesn't have a choice to behave differently, or doesn't have the voice to defend themselves. Which is, by the way, that second thing, especially the voice, is often the case on social media. It's very, very difficult to imagine someone defending themselves against a mob of a social media mob that is shaming them. Even if they tried to defend themselves, the defense would only reach probably very few people. So this notion of choice and voice are very important in thinking whether it's appropriate in a given situation to shame people. And I do think there's way too much inappropriate shame going on, especially on social media. Um, but not only on social media, there's a lot of shaming that's happening, as you pointed out, in public policy, shaming poor people, um, making it look like they're choosing their their poverty. There's a lot of different ways that people, politicians and people have power, avoid confronting real problems in our society. And one of them is to blame the victim, to blame the people that are actually suffering. And that's a way of shaming them, and to say, like, this is your choice. If you made better choices, you wouldn't have this problem and we wouldn't have to think about you. So, and that's, of course, sometimes true, by the way. Sometimes people make poor choices, but other times we're just trying to avoid solving a major problem because we don't know how to, or it's expensive to. And the way we argue that we don't have to is by just shaming the people that are suffering. So, yes, I do think that we could do better. I think just by considering whether the shame is appropriate and making sure that it is, that would be a better choice for all of us. Now, the one sort of object of shame that I consider almost always appropriate, by the way, is people in power. So people in power have choices that they can make that you can disagree with, and it's appropriate to disagree with them if they're making choices that you think are wrong. It's also the case that people in power have the voice. They can defend their choices because they have the spotlight. They can make statements. So it's to be clear, I do think shame is sometimes appropriate, and I often think that shame would be appropriate if we hold powerful people to account through shame. Of course, it's even better if we can just vote them in or out of office, depending on how they behave. But sometimes shame works too. And so that would be an appropriate use of shame if we're holding people to account that are in power, making the wrong choices.